In our headlines on this Friday, July 24th, here in South Korea, President Lee Jae-myung begins a high-profile tour to the Americas today, putting artificial intelligence and economic diplomacy at the center of his agenda. Meanwhile, the Trade Ministry here dismisses concerns of potentially higher U.S. tariffs for South Korea under Section 301, pointing out that Washington has confirmed its commitment to the previously agreed 15% tariff cap. And the government will keep fuel taxes lower through the end of September to shield consumers here from rising oil prices fueled by renewed conflict in the Middle East. President Lee Jae-myung is heading first to North America and then to South America to launch a high-profile trip focused on AI, trade and new strategic partnerships across the region. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min starts us off with his agenda.
The president's meeting with four major tech firms includes big names: NVIDIA's Jensen Huang, OpenAI's Sam Altman, Anthropic's Dario Amodei, and Broadcom's Hock Tan.
Anthropic and OpenAI are the two biggest AI service providers. NVIDIA is the largest AI-related GPU supplier, and Broadcom also is a major player in AI-related semiconductors and software.
President Lee Jae-myung will also hold an AI summit in San Francisco on Friday, attended by Samsung's Lee Jae-yong, SK's Choi Tae-won, Hyundai Motors' Chung Ui-sun, and Naver's Lee Hae-jin, along with the U.S. big tech CEOs. MOUs will be signed between Korean firms and the global tech firms, and President Lee will announce his AI vision for related global cooperation.
Major Korean firms and global big tech firms will gather together. It will be a chance to expand our vision for the three mega projects on a global level.
Experts also point out the need for greater cooperation in software amid the intensifying global AI race.
Korea right now is very strong in AI, partially because we have memory chips, but not any higher level GPUs or software. So the president may be asking for cooperation in Korea, trying to expand into this more difficult technical areas.
After wrapping up his U.S. trip, President Lee will pay a state visit to Brazil for a summit with President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. He will then head to Santiago to meet his Chilean counterpart, José Antonio Cast, who took office in March, before flying to Buenos Aires to meet Argentine President Javier Milei. The trip aims to expand trade and investment with the South American bloc, while strengthening partnerships on economic security and energy. On the way home, the president will stop by Germany to meet Koreans residing in that country. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the Trump administration's tariffs under Section 122 expires on this Friday. And in light of this reality, the U.S. has announced intentions to impose a new set of tariffs under Section 301. Arirang tells us what this means for South Korea.
The Trump administration has announced its final decision to impose tariffs of up to 12.5% on imports from South Korea, Japan, and dozens of other trading partners over concerns that they have not done enough to prevent goods made with forced labor from entering their markets. The Office of the U.S. Trade Representative said the new duties, ranging from 10 to 12.5%, follow investigations into 60 economies under Section 301 of the 1974 Trade Act. The new tariffs are set to replace the temporary 10% global tariffs that expire Friday, which were introduced after the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the Trump administration's country-specific reciprocal tariffs in February. Last month, the USTR had already proposed a 12.5% tariff on South Korea and several other economies based on its preliminary findings. Seoul strongly opposed the proposal during the public consultation process, arguing that the planned tariff was both unwarranted and disproportionate given South Korea's existing efforts to combat forced labor and regulate imports. Meanwhile, the USTR is also carrying out separate Section 301 investigations into South Korea, China, Japan, and 13 other economies over what it describes as unfair trade practices tied to structural overcapacity and excess production. The latest measures reflect the administration's broader effort to establish new trade restrictions after its earlier reciprocal tariff policy was invalidated by the courts. 이승재, Arirang News.
In related news, the Trade Ministry here says the Trump administration has confirmed its commitment to the previously agreed 15% tariff cap for South Korea. The statement comes in response to rampant concerns of potentially higher U.S. tariffs under Section 301. The 15% tariff ceiling was set last year in return for South Korea's pledge to invest $350 billion in the U.S. Recent reports of U.S. tariffs for alleged forced labor practices, as well as for overproduction, had raised fears of rates surging past 15%. The Blue House, for its part, has vowed to maintain close consultations to ensure all future U.S. tariff actions remain within this boundary. Also here at home, fuel taxes will remain lower through the end of September as part of efforts to ease the public burden of rising oil prices fueled by renewed conflict in the Middle East. Our EG uncovers this latest decision.
The Korean government has decided to extend the temporary fuel tax cuts for another 2 months through the end of September to ease the burden on the public. According to the Ministry of Finance and Economy on Friday, the current tax reduction rates will remain unchanged at 15% for gasoline and 25% for diesel and butane. Oil prices have kept surging, driven by Red Sea shipping risk and escalating U.S.-Iran tensions. Brent crude, the global benchmark for oil prices on Thursday, closed above $100 per barrel for the first time in about 2 months. Following several days of increases, it rose more than 7% from the previous session to close at $100.69 per barrel, still remaining above the 100 threshold on Friday. Officials explained that they decided to keep the tax reduction buffer in place, taking into account the geopolitical tensions in the Middle East.
As escalating tensions in the Middle East threaten to disrupt supply chains and fuel inflation through higher oil prices, the government will maintain a high state of readiness and take all necessary precautions.
Korea is also striving to minimize the burden of living costs on the public. To stabilize the prices of eggs and mackerel, the government will diversify import sources and strengthen the domestic supply chain. The government decided to expand egg import partners beyond the U.S., Thailand, and Brazil to include New Zealand and Poland. To build the long-term egg production capacity, the government will also subsidize farm facilities and support for private egg processing and storage. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries will directly import an additional 1,200 tons of mackerel from countries including the UK and Norway. Officials added that the government will do everything possible to bring consumer inflation down to the 2% range this month, after remaining above 3% for 2 consecutive months. Lee Ju-yeon, Arirang News.
Staying on the local front, as the National Assembly looks to finalize the formation of its standing committee leadership, parliamentary leaders paid tribute at the Seoul National Cemetery on this Friday. National Assembly Speaker Cho Jung-sik and floor leaders from the ruling and main opposition parties, as well as other committee chairs, visited the cemetery as the second half of the Assembly is expected to accelerate legislative work. In the guest book at the cemetery, Cho vowed the Assembly would honor the sacrifice of the nation's fallen soldiers and build a future together with the people. Meanwhile, during a general meeting, the ruling Democratic Party addressed a controversial proposal to strip prosecutors of their authority to conduct supplementary investigations. South Korea's top diplomat to UNESCO believes Busan's hosting of this year's World Heritage Committee meeting stands as proof of international confidence in the country's capability to take on a leading role in global cultural protection. Our Cho Young-un brings us this exclusive interview.
The UNESCO World Heritage Committee not only decides new inscriptions, but also reviews the conservation of existing sites and addresses shared heritage challenges. In an exclusive interview with Arirang News in Busan, the permanent delegate of the Republic of Korea to UNESCO described Korea's role as the host of the 48th session.
Hosting this meeting in Korea means the international community recognizes the country's leadership in UNESCO's cultural agenda and its role in advancing cooperation under the World Heritage Convention. Korea has also taken on an important role in supporting heritage conservation efforts in many other countries.
She explained that Korea has built extensive expertise through the restoration and management of its heritage sites and has been actively sharing those experiences with other member states.
한국은 세계유산뿐만 아니라 또 무형유산, 기록유산 등 굉장히 다양한 분야에서 또 국제적인 존재감을 넓혀가고 있는데요. 현재 문화유산 분야에서 한국의 강점이 좀 무엇이라고 보시는지, 그리고 국제사회에 어떤 기여를 하고 있다고 평가하시는지 말씀 부탁드립니다.
Korea's greatest strength lies in its long history, rich cultural heritage, and experience of achieving rapid socio-economic development while continuously seeking harmony between tradition and modernity.
A key issue for Korea during this year's session is the Phase 2 extension of UNESCO World Heritage status for Korea's 갯벌 or tidal flats. The ambassador said the proposed extension is about more than expanding the site, saying that it strengthens the ecological connectivity and marks the beginning of an even greater responsibility for long-term management.
이번 세계유산위원회에서는 한국의 갯벌의 세계유산 확대 등재 여부가 큰 관심사인데요. 등재에 대한 어떤 기대를 갖고 계신지, 또 등재가 확정된다면 앞으로의 보전과 관리, 그리고 국제협력 측면에서 가장 중요한 과제는 무엇이라고 생각하시는지 말씀 부탁드립니다.
First, it is essential to establish an integrated management system for the entire ecosystem. Second, we need a framework that can anticipate and effectively manage the various threats facing the tidal flats, including sea level rise caused by climate change, pollution, coastal development, and increasing tourism.
Looking beyond this year's committee, she said World Heritage sites are facing increasingly complex challenges, making preventive management more important than ever.
Rather than responding after threats emerge, we need systems that can anticipate and prevent risks in advance. Conservation must respect international principles while reflecting local contexts and working closely with communities.
The future of World Heritage, she says, will depend not only on stronger conservation efforts, but also on community participation, shared benefits, and education that passes its value on to future generations. 조영은, Arirang News, Busan.
In other news now, an appeals court here in Seoul on Friday ordered SK Group chairman Choi Tae-won to pay 944 billion Korean won, roughly $640 million in cash, in a property settlement to his former wife No So-young. The division ratio was set at 2/3 for Choi and 1/3 for No. It reduced the amount paid to No by almost $300 million, but maintained that Choi's stake in SK Incorporated, valued at around $1.4 billion as of April 2024, should be included in the assets subject to division. However, the court did not recognize alleged slush funds tied to No's late father, former President No Tae-woo, as part of her contribution to the couple's wealth. The couple started divorce proceedings back in 2017. The latest military confrontation between the US and Iran is fast becoming a wider test of regional stability as Donald Trump warns of an unprecedented assault while Tehran seeks to open a new battle front. Our Park Chun-han has the latest.
U.S. President Donald Trump is warning of an unprecedented military attack against Iran as regional tensions escalate. In an interview with Axios released on Thursday, Trump stated he is close to launching strikes that will be bigger than ever before. Thursday's night was the 13th consecutive night of U.S. airstrikes targeting Iranian military assets. According to state media reports cited by CNN, the latest attack has left 4 people dead across several areas in Iran. Trump's threat comes as Yemen's Houthi rebels declared a naval blockade on Saudi Arabian ships in the Red Sea, recently targeting 2 Saudi oil tankers. Trump warned that the U.S. will hold Tehran responsible for any further Houthi attacks, calling the rebels an Iranian proxy and promising severe military retaliation. Speaking at an event in Washington on Thursday, Trump downplayed Iran's remaining military capacity.
We've knocked out their Navy, their Air Force, all of their radar, most of their capability in terms of manufacturing. Their drones are down 84%, their missiles are down 91%. They have no radar, they have no anti-aircraft, they have no nothing, other than they're mean and they're smart, and they still have some capability.
Meanwhile, a Reuters exclusive reports that Tehran is actively strengthening its Houthi allies. Iran reportedly flew Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commanders' new missile systems and gold into the Yemeni port city of Hodeidah on July 13th to fund and bolster Houthi operations. Amid fears of an escalating conflict, the U.S. House of Representatives on Thursday passed a resolution 214 to 208, requiring congressional approval for war with Iran. Park Jun-an, Arirang News.
And South Korea's shipbuilding partnership with the U.S. has taken tangible shape over in Washington, D.C. with the opening of a center that puts into motion the so-called MASGA project. Our Kim Jun-ong files this report.
Korea and the United States officially opened their Shipbuilding Partnership Center on Thursday in Washington, D.C. That follows Seoul's commitment to invest $150 billion in the U.S. shipbuilding sector under last year's bilateral trade and investment deal. Funded by the Korean government, the center will advance joint projects and investment, technology exchange, and workforce training. The cooperation is part of the broader MASGA, Make American Shipbuilding Great Again initiative aimed at reviving America's shipbuilding industry. The opening comes 2 months after Seoul and Washington signed an MOU to establish a joint center and expand bilateral shipbuilding cooperation. Officials and industry leaders from both countries gathered in Washington for the opening. Industry Minister Kim Jong-kwan said the new center reflects Korea's strong commitment to supporting America's shipbuilding industry.
First, clear and sustained demand. Second, strong incentive. And third, alliance-friendly regulatory environment. With these 3 pillars, the bridge strategy will become a reality.
He then added that Korea is ready to build LNG carriers while urging Washington to offer incentives and remove regulatory hurdles. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick also attended the opening ceremony and emphasized the need for tangible results from cooperation between the 2 countries.
We are going to judge the center by the capital you deploy, the facilities you modernize, the workers you train, the supply chains you establish, and ultimately the simple number of how many domestic produced ships we make together.
Lutnick also pledged support to ease regulatory hurdles for Korean companies investing in the U.S. Korea's ambassador to the U.S., Kang Kyung-hwa, called the launch a starting point for building a resilient maritime industrial ecosystem between the 2 countries. The 2 sides also signed 15 MOUs across 4 areas of cooperation. Kim Jun-ong, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the New York Times has criticized the Trump administration of double standards following the U.S.'s recent nuclear agreement with Saudi Arabia. The Daily points out the agreement could eventually allow uranium enrichment inside the kingdom, despite the reality that Saudi Arabia has no operating nuclear power plants. In contrast, the American paper says South Korea operates 26 reactors, complies with strict non-proliferation safeguards, and has repeatedly ruled out developing nuclear weapons. South Korea, for its part, has long sought U.S. consent for limited civilian enrichment and spent fuel reprocessing. Accordingly, the New York Times shared concerns that continued U.S. resistance could create a rift in the alliance with South Korea. Foreign Minister Cho Hyun and his counterparts in the Asia-Pacific region have reaffirmed the need for dialogue and denuclearization on the Korean peninsula. Our foreign affairs correspondent Oh Soo-young covers this unified stance.
Foreign ministers from across the Indo-Pacific have called for renewed dialogue with North Korea, while reaffirming the need for denuclearization and compliance with UN Security Council resolutions. The message came at the ASEAN Regional Forum in Manila, the region's only multilateral security forum in which both Korea and North Korea are members, although Pyongyang stayed away for a second consecutive year. Foreign Minister Cho Hyun said on Thursday that peace and stability on the Korean peninsula remains essential to regional security and prosperity. He said Seoul would keep walking towards peaceful coexistence and shared growth, but stressed that one-sided efforts cannot succeed. Cho called on Pyongyang to respond to Seoul's efforts to resume dialogue and cooperation and urged the ASEAN Regional Forum to play a constructive role in reducing tensions. Many of the 27 participating members expressed concern over North Korea's continued nuclear and missile development. They emphasized both the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula and the importance of bringing Pyongyang back to dialogue. The meeting also adopted the Manila Plan of Action, setting out the forum's direction for confidence building, preventive diplomacy, and security cooperation for the next decade. At the East Asia Summit Foreign Ministers meeting later in the day, Cho again sought support for resolving Korea Peninsula issues through dialogue and diplomacy. On the South China Sea, he stressed that freedom of navigation and overflight must be guaranteed, and that any code of conduct should comply with international law and protect the rights of third countries. Participants also called for unhindered humanitarian assistance in Myanmar, while expressing concern over renewed tensions around the Strait of Hormuz. Cho said the free and safe passage of all vessels must be protected in international waters. The meetings followed the ASEAN +3 Foreign Ministers meeting, where Korea, Japan and China discussed closer cooperation with the 11 ASEAN members. Amid growing geopolitical and economic uncertainty, Cho proposed strengthening practical cooperation in areas including supply chains, digital transformation and responses to regional challenges. Wrapping up his Manila schedule, Cho co-chaired the Korea-Mekong Foreign Ministers meeting with his Thai counterpart. Marking 15 years of cooperation, the two sides adopted a statement outlining priorities for the next 5 years. These include digital innovation, climate resilience and smart agriculture, backed by Korean development assistance and the Korea-Mekong Cooperation Fund. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, North Korea, for its part, is reportedly hosting a series of events to mark the upcoming July 27th anniversary of the Korean War armistice, which the regime promotes internally as Victory Day. State media reported Friday that labor unions and agricultural groups organized poetry sessions and musical performances praising the regime's founder, Kim Il-sung. State outlets also published daily articles highlighting alleged military achievements from the 1950 to 1953 conflict, which ended in a ceasefire rather than a peace treaty. Meanwhile, foreign diplomats stationed in Pyongyang, including delegates from China and Russia, were taken on guided tours of war sites.
Heat alerts have now been expanded to most of the country, and Pohang and Gyeongju in Gyeongsang-Buk-do province have been upgraded to a severe heat wave warning. It's issued when feels like highs could reach 38 degrees Celsius or higher, or when daytime highs could climb to around 39 degrees. So be sure to stay hydrated and avoid spending too much time outdoors. Saturday will bring another hot day across most of the country, with Seoul reaching 32 degrees Celsius and Daegu climbing to 35 degrees. As the stationary front shifts north into North Korea, a few showers will mainly pop up across the capital area and Gangwon-do province tomorrow. Then on Sunday, the front will sag south again, bringing rain to the central regions Jeollabuk-do and Gyeongsang-Buk-do provinces. As for temperatures, Seoul will start the day at 26 degrees, Chuncheon 24 and Jeju 27 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 32 degrees, Daejeon 32 degrees as well, Gyeongju 36 degrees, Jeju 34 degrees. Looking ahead, the monsoon will wrap up across the country starting next week. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. As always, thank you for watching.
주파수를 훔쳐봐도 오랫동안 날리고 밤을 어디를지 물을 훔치는 적이 언덕을 가도 멀찍이 태양은 언제나
Korea Initiative. The future is already in motion. Intelligence redesigns reality. Life expands beyond limits. Culture moves the world. Our vision reaches into the infinite. Together, we will go even further. The K Initiative.
From one of the world's most powerful passports to one of its top student cities, South Korea continues to garner global attention for its growing international appeal. With more on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to yet another edition of Press Perspective. It's Friday, July 24th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. South Korea is making headlines on the global stage again for the strength of its passport to its appeal as a destination for foreign students. For more on this, I have Stephen with Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia here in the studio. Stephen, welcome back.
Nice to be here, thanks.
I also have writer Colin with us. Colin, it's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Right, Stephen, South Korea's passport has ranked the world's #2 most powerful. What does passport power really mean, and what are your takeaways with regard to South Korea's ranking?
My takeaway is that a strong passport is a great thing to have because it reduces the amount of paperwork you have to do. It reduces the amount of hoops you have to jump through. It can reduce the amount of money that you have to spend getting visas whenever you want to visit a country. I mean, I don't know about my fellow panelists here, but there are a few things I dislike more than when I want to go somewhere, having to fill out forms and having to provide documents and do all kinds of things just so that I can get my foot in the door. I remember when I had to get a journalist visa to travel to India to cover the G20 a few years ago. There was a quite rigorous process, and I don't know what it is about me, but paperwork is just a real kind of bête noire of mine. So having a strong passport means you just don't have to deal with that. I mean, I remember when I landed, the last time I went to the UK, I landed at Heathrow Airport, and they had a configuration that I don't think I've seen anywhere else, where there were two options. It was if you have a passport from Canada, the US, any European Union country, Singapore, Korea, Japan, kind of any rich country, you go this way, and all you got to do is scan your passport and walk right in. If you have a passport from anywhere else in the world, you go in this other direction, and you have to deal with an immigration agent, and you have to, potentially take questions, potentially be searched. And this is all, this is an iteration of passport power. I guess there's a lot of things that go into this. There's just in some destination countries, I think it's just kind of their orientation. Some places just insist on getting a visa from anybody. They just want to have a kind of stricter control over who comes in and out, and perhaps maybe use that as a source of revenue. It could depend on the diplomatic relations between the two countries, but my impression is more than anything, if you have a passport from a rich country, if you have a passport from a country that has high per capita income, and the destination country is confident that you are not coming in there looking for a job, looking to stay, looking to earn local income, they're pretty confident that you're just coming in for tourist reasons or for a short-term stay. They'll gladly let you right in. And I think at least part of South Korea's passport power is, I think, the reputation of South Korean travelers as being either tourists or people on short-term business days.
Right, indeed. Colin, the US, meanwhile, has fallen to 10th place after topping the list 20 years ago. As an American, what's your response?
Well, in a way, it's not surprising, given that this passport power ranking is a function of less the absolute power of a country or the status of the country itself than of its relationships with other countries or the relationships it has in the world. And you could still say the US is the most powerful country in the world, but also that its relationships have deteriorated in recent years or decades. As you say, in 2006, it was #1, along with rankings are shared, so it was with Finland and Denmark and sort of Northern European countries. All those countries have, I believe, lost place in those 20 years. So you can see global realignment at work in these passport rankings. But we should clarify that being 10th place also means that there are not 9 but 35 countries above you. But the difference between South Korea and the US in terms of countries accessible without a visa, it's only, I think, 8 countries. So Koreans can go to 188 countries. Americans can go to 180, something like that. And I think the difference, the gap includes Russia and China, so that's significant. Some sort of Central Asian countries, which I'd like to maybe visit one day. But I do plan to get a Korean passport myself at some point in the near future. So I look forward to trying it out, maybe going to China without a visa for 30 days or whatever they give you, and just seeing how it works. But for the moment, I'm only on the US passport, which still is pretty good. I will say it's not by any means a bad passport to have.
Right indeed. Stephen, there are foreigners who claim the South Koreans have traveled on easy mode given the power of their passport. As a person who has a Korean spouse, have you noticed this phenomenon while traveling?
I sure have. My family are planning to travel to Vietnam next month. And when we planned this trip, I learned to my delight that I thought that we would all need to get visas to enter Vietnam, but it was actually only me. And this is a kind of inversion of the, perhaps old perception of Western countries as being more privileged when operating abroad. There's an example of an East Asian country that has easier access to a country like Vietnam. So I was happy because it meant that while I was going to have to get myself a visa, I wasn't going to have to do that for either my daughter or my wife. My daughter has South Korean and Canadian passports, so all we've got to do is just take her on her Korean passport, and it's no problem. So I mean this feeds into, I think, our earlier discussion that a lot of this depends on the bilateral relations between countries. I mean, South Koreans are famously a very large source of tourists to Vietnam, and I think Vietnam is South Korea's third largest trading partner after the U.S. and China. A lot of South Korean companies have pretty big investments there, and employ a lot of people there, and a very, very fruitful bilateral economic relation there. So I think even though Vietnam is a nominally socialist or communist country with not all of these civic or political freedoms that we enjoy in the West, I think that the leadership there just sees it as a prudent economic decision to make it easier for Koreans to go in and out. And hopefully it was a fairly straight, despite my disdain for paperwork, getting a Vietnam visa was pretty straightforward. It was not a...
Right. Colin, you also have a Korean wife. Have you observed such merits?
Well, not yet, actually, because she only recently got a Korean passport. Again, I suppose we should say, because to fill in some details about Korea, for those who may not know, most Koreans can only have one nationality at a time. So there's really no dual citizenship for most people, almost everyone in Korea. And so she had Canadian citizenship for a few years, and that required her to give up her Korean citizenship. But there is a procedure to get it back. And I did notice while attending her naturalization ceremony that most of the people there were 100 or so, were in fact ethnic Koreans who were regaining their nationality, their Korean nationality. So it's becoming a more popular move, I think, not to stay abroad in terms of your passport, but to sort of come back legally as well, not just on one of the sort of visas, but actual return to citizenship. So she got it back, partially because we want our kids to have Korean citizenship as well, and there's not birthright citizenship here, so you do need to do that. And next time we travel abroad, maybe next year, maybe I'll see this in action. But so far, yes, I've only been seeing how the Canadian passport works, and that's about the same as the US, from what I understand.
Right, I see. Moving forward, Stephen, Seoul has once again been named the world's best student city for 2027, with several other Korean cities also making that list. What stands out to you with regard to this particular ranking?
Well, before I say what stands out to me, I would say I think the rubric for this distinction is they weigh the strength of the university, they weigh the student diversity, they weigh just student feedback, like just the quality of the responses where students self-report their experiences. And one thing that I thought was interesting is part of it is graduates' postgraduate employment prospects. So one of the things that they consider is if you go to study in this country, what are the chances that you will be permitted to stay? And permitted being able to transfer from a student visa to a work visa. I don't know enough of the details to really speak on that in a lot of with any real authority. But like I had always thought that that was something. Like I remember reading that as something kind of flagged that Korean universities were concerned about. Like they wanted, for their own interests, they wanted to make that easier. They said it would be easier for them to attract more competitive graduate students and just more students generally if they could offer a clearer path to employment after graduation. And then I believe it was under Yoon Suk-yeol's presidency, he had highlighted that as a potential one possible partial solution to South Korea's demographic crisis, is that they could channel all of these folks that they have studying in universities, people who have skills, people who have lived in the country. A lot of them speak the language. Like, this was a possible way that they could introduce more, more sort of economically productive people into the population, and ease the dependency ratio that we see, where there's a lot of people who are elderly and not able to work, and then there's a lot of people who are children and, of course, not working. So perhaps some progress has been made on that area. That seems like a kind of win-win. I think if you're a policymaker here, it seems natural that you would want, that Indian engineer doing a PhD in Ulsan, you would want there to be a path for him or her to go work for an SME in the Southeast. So that seems like a positive development then.
Right, for sure. Colin, I wonder, what do you think do international students gain from studying in South Korea?
Well, they get a couple years in a country they've been fascinated by, certainly. And that's nothing to sneeze at for a lot of them. As interest in Korea builds, there are a lot of young people who want to come here anyway. And for many, especially in countries where K-culture is popular, it's an economically viable choice to come get a degree in South Korea rather in their home countries. Whether they can stay or even want to stay in South Korea after those 2, 3, 4 years is another question entirely. But it's not hard to see why Seoul would come up at the top spot in a ranking like this, especially given that almost every high-ranked university in the country is in Seoul. So that right there is going to bring the numbers up. And this is difficult to even conceive of from the American perspective, that so many high-level universities would be in one single city. But sure enough, they are. And indeed, the companies that would employ, at least theoretically, graduates are mostly here as well. So for that reason alone, you'd expect Seoul to be getting near the top. There are other reasons as well. I mean, as I say, Korea itself is popular, and we can see that in how other Korean cities have entered the rankings. I think Daejeon with KAIST, the most prestigious engineering school, is there somewhere, and maybe even Gwangju. So that's a bit more surprising, but that Seoul is number one, I mean, you can kind of see why that would work, why that would happen, how that would work out.
Right. This is an impromptu question, Colin, but previously international media outlets sought to highlight perhaps South Korea's intense education culture, and yet Seoul has been named one of the world's top student city. Do you find that ironic?
Well, in a sense, although if you break it down into the stages of education, it's not quite so surprising, because foreign students don't tend to come to Korea for high school or for middle school. They come for college or for postgraduate education, I think, more commonly. And well, if you talk to older Koreans, they'll tell you what their experience was. Yes, high school was hard. We killed ourselves studying, and then went to college and did nothing for 4 years. Now, I think college has become more rigorous here. University has become a place where you do have to do some studying, unlike in the past. But still, the drop-off between high school and college in intensity is pretty sharp, from what I understand. So if you come to Korea to go to college or to go to grad school, I don't think you're not going to have to stay up to 4 a.m. studying every single night. It's not, there's not the sunung, there's not the entrance exam at the end of it. You have an easier experience, or a more comfortable one, shall we say. So I think these are two different educational cultures. Now, whether, as I say, whether a given international student will enjoy life in Korea after graduation, who can say, but it'll be a lot more fun than if they'd gone to high school here, I would suspect.
Right, for sure. Also here in South Korea, Stephen, the country is considering restricting social media access to children under 14, joining a growing number of countries worldwide. What do you suppose is driving this global campaign?
I think, just to put it as simply as I kind of think what's driving it is a growing consensus that being on social media is just not all that healthy for very young people, and it presents them to a lot of risks that parents would prefer to shelter their kids from. In my work at Nikkei Asia, I edited some stories from Australia, which is the first country in the world that enacted a ban of this sort. And the real driving force there, the most vocal proponents of this ban there, were parents of children who had suffered really unfortunate outcomes. Like a couple of, there was at least one father of a young girl who had committed suicide after falling into depression. There's a number of cases, children who had been targeted by, predatory individuals online, and just the consensus that's emerging, I think, is just that the brain of a young person is not equipped to handle the kind of very intense stimulation that comes from social media, and is not mature enough to handle the kinds of social pressures that can be attendant on social media. I mean, I'm really glad I didn't have Instagram when I was in high school, because if I saw a bunch of kids playing and they didn't invite me, that would have really upset me. Or I don't know. There's plenty of other examples, but I remember when the Australian policymakers were announcing this, they said this ban is going to allow Australian kids to spend more time playing sports, spend more time creating art, spend more time playing music, spend more time outside doing the kinds of things that we know are very healthy for children. And so there's been no real significant, I think that's arguments is just a lot more persuasive to a lot of people than the arguments against this ban. I mean, the arguments against this ban were, that this was like an infringement on young people's rights, or that this was going to deprive young people of access to information. I mean, there is some merit to those positions, but I think that the other position is just much more strong and much more compelling, that kids have the rest of their life to be online and to be doing the things that we as grown-ups spend our days doing, staring at screens. I'm sure none of us are proud of it, but just our professional and our personal lives demand this of us. Let kids be kids. South Korean kids already have a pretty challenging upbringing for some of the reasons that Colin alluded to. There's a lot of pressure on them to study. There's pressure on them to distinguish themselves academically from a very young age. So I think if South Korea does go in this direction, there will be a fair bit of support from the population at large, and I think that we're going to see more countries make moves in this direction.
Stephen, this is an impromptu question, but speaking
Sure.
as a father of a young girl, what age do you suppose would be appropriate for her to start interacting on social media platforms?
How about never? Does it never work?
It works. As a mother of a daughter, it works.
I mean, that's my goal. I mean, as I raise her, I try my best to inculcate in her affections for reading books and for playing with other kids and for being outside and all the things that I know are healthy and I know are going to lead her to a positive social and intellectual and physical development. So, I mean, I'm only kind of being sarcastic when I say never, because I want to hold it off as long as possible. I want her to live an offline life and enjoy analog habits for as long as possible. What I see as the potential complication down the road is once she gets to a certain age where all of her friends are organizing socially online, where it's like, I need to be on this platform so that I can, be part of this conversation and that I can get invited to the sleepovers and all the rest. I mean, at that point, she's going to need to, but my plan is to very closely monitor what she's doing online. I mean, if she's online exchanging messages with anybody, I'm going to need to know who these people are. I'm going to err on the side of caution with all
Right, of course. It's always better to be safe than sorry.
I think so, yeah.
Colin, what lessons do you suppose could South Korea keep in mind as it considers measures to restrict social media access for children?
Yes, most of the coverage has been about so far the ban that Stephen mentioned. Australia's ban from last year, the end of last year. And a lot of coverage has pointed out how enforcement is not easy, technologically and in other regards as well. Kids can get around these barriers fairly easily, but then the defenders of the ban say, well, it's not about now. It's not necessarily about these teenagers, but about making it harder and harder as time goes on. Wait till the fullness of time takes effect and see if kids are using social media in the same way in Australia 10 years down the line, 15 years down the line. And fair enough, I think Korea, given the way its internet infrastructure works, might be more able to lock down usage for certain age groups, for better or for worse. I mean, there have been certain events like the whole real name fiasco a few years ago. So if it's technically possible, it may not be legally viable. Bear that in mind. But as well, if you're thinking in the long term, as Australia claims to be doing, and as France, I guess, will be doing, considering they passed a ban themselves this week, more stringent than Australia is for it. It's a blanket ban under age 15. We'll see if they can actually enforce it or not. But if you're thinking long term, internet technology changes fast, and South Korea is a country that knows that very well. And 15 years from now, when my kids are the relevant age, it's 2041 or whatever, I think social media as a concept it might seem a bit quaint, sort of a millennial thing. It'll be something else, and it's difficult to stay ahead of the technology. I mean, the law never does. So in a way, you have to be thinking, what kind of environment in general are we creating for kids, and why is social media why does social media feel like the best option for many of them, the best thing they could be doing with their time? That's more the question to ask, but it's harder to address legally or technologically, that's for sure.
Right, for sure. I will have to leave it there today. Thank you so much, Colin, for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Stephen, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, that is all for this week's editions of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching and have a great weekend.
Korea Initiative. The future is already in motion. Intelligence redesigns reality. Life expands beyond limits. Culture moves the world. Our vision reaches into the infinite. Together, we will go even further. The K Initiative.